CNT125 Network Management Lab. We're now working on the section with our TFTP server. Now, real quickly, we have configured the switch, downloaded a copy of the config, if you will, put in a text file, edited it, and delivered it to the other switches. And we did the same thing with the router. Did one router, downloaded, edited, and delivered the file to the other routers as a text file. Now, that works if you have just a couple devices in a network. You can manage those little text files in a folder on your computer, if you will. But if I have a larger network with a lot more devices and more changes going on, it's sometimes handy to actually have a location that all the configs come to, like a server, that could be backing up those configs each evening. And that allows me to have kind of like a really safe storage of my configs. And as we're going to find out, I can even pull the config from the server back to a device in an emergency. So we're going to work with our TFTP server right here. So we configured the IP on this earlier. Now let's check the services on here. I'm going to open up this device. Let's go to here's physical, config. Let's go to services. We're going to go to the TFTP tab and see that the service is on. And right now there's no files here. I've purposely cleaned it out that there's no files. We are going to store a couple files from our network onto the server, and then we're going to pull one back off onto a device. So this is up and running and ready for me to receive files. Now, I'm going to open that up in a minute, but I'm going to check my connection to my device and the TFTP server. So on my PC, let's remote into R1 again. So we're going to use our SSH client and go to R1, 192.168. In this case, it's 128.1. Username of test. We'll connect in, password of password. Welcome to R1, enable, class. All right, from here, I'm going to issue a ping to that TFTP server, 192.168.160.10 is that device. And I'm looking for a successful ping. That is actually a successful ping. So since I can ping it, I can now actually communicate with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm on this PC, remote it into R1. I'm going to take the config from R1 and send it to the TFTP server. So I'm going to open up my server again here, go to the TFTP status, right, or a tab right there, service, and I'm going to leave that handy. And I'm going to, from R1, I'm going to say copy, instead of copy run start, if I do copy run start, it copies what's in RAM into NVRAM on the router. This time I'm going to say copy run TFTP, meaning copy what's currently running on the router and RAM to the TFTP server. So I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to say, okay, what's the address of that TFTP server? Well, 192.168.160.10 is the address of mine. Check your map for yours. It's going to say, all right, what do you want to call this file? SNMP R1 config? Sure, I'm going to call it that. That's fine. I'm going to hit the enter key. It's going to save it and send it to the TFTP server. So I'm going to come over here now, and I'm just going to click on a different service and come back. There is my router 1 config saved to the TFTP server. So if I was looking for a way to get all my configs into a central location, I can use the TFTP server to do this. So now that I put one there, let's exit out of this. Do you want to reestablish? No, I don't. Let's connect now to 192.168. We're going to connect to R2. This guy is 32.2 on my map. Username of test. Password of password. Welcome to R2. Enable class. Again, let's ping 192.168.160.10. Make sure I have connection, which I do. Now let's do copy, run, TFTP. What's the address? 192.168.160.10. What do I want to call it? Yep, I'll call it R2 config. It has sent it. It has gotten there successfully. So I'll go here again, and there's my R2 config. So all my devices on my network, I could copy their config to the TFTP server. And again, being a server, I probably have redundant hard drives, and I probably even have it set up to be backing up nightly or weekly, that I would have all my configs in one spot, centrally located, and they're being backed up. And what I can do then is what I'm going to show you in the next router. I can pull a config from the TFTP server back to a device as well. We'll get to that in just a second. This allows me a repository to save all my configs. And I might even, before I work on a router, I might save the config to the TFTP server, work on my router, and if I really mess it up, I can pull back that last working config. That gives me like a little backup mechanism in case I get myself, goofed up when I'm configuring something. Okay, so there is getting my configs from R1 and R2 onto the TFTP server. What we're going to do now, let's connect into R3. I'm actually going to connect into it directly. So I'm going to close my TFTP server for right now. Let's connect into R3 directly. Username, test, password, enable, class. Okay. What I'm going to do, let's make sure I have access to the TFTP server. So we'll do ping 192.168.160.10. I do. I'm going to do copy run TFTP 192.168.160.10. File name R3 sounds good. If I check my TFTP server, it should be there. There's R3 config. Excellent. Okay, again, I'm just going to close that to make my life simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to erase and reload the router. So R3, I'm going to do erase, start, hit the enter key, reload. I'm not going to save it. I don't want to save anything. I want to let this thing reboot. When it reboots, it'll be wiped out. There'll be no config here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure the interface to talk to the TFTP server, and then I'm going to pull the config from the TFTP server. So no, I do not want to enter initial configuration dialog. Enable config T. All I'm going to do is configure the gigabit Ethernet port, just enough that I can actually talk to this thing. IP address 192.168.160.1, 255.255.224.0. No shutdown. And again, I'm going to watch that come online. I need at least that port working so I can talk to the server. So I will let that port settle. Once that settles, I will do a ping. Oh my goodness, there we go. Ping of 192.168.160.10 and make sure I can communicate with my TFTP server. So I'm going to let that settle. I'll try it. It might time out because it might still be a little too early. But there we go. Now we got success. There we go. So now I actually can talk to my TFTP server. And if I do a show run here, you'll see that there's no config here. Only this interface that I plugged in just enough to talk to it. There's no routing table, no console, SSH, none of it. No config is here. It's been wiped out. So maybe something happened on the router, it rebooted, it lost its config. I jump in here real quick, configure that interface, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy from the TFTP server back to the router. So I'm going to issue the config T command. I'm going to say copy. Actually, excuse me. We need to be here. Here we go. I was right in the first place. Copy TFTP run. So copy from the TFTP server to the RAM or running config. It's going to say, okay, what's the address of the TFTP server? 192.168.160.10. What's the file name that you want to load? Okay, so let's verify that. On my TFTP server, the file name is actually this. I need that syntax. I need that just right. So I need to say SNMP underscore R3-CONFG. So I'm double checking that. SNMP underscore R3-CONFG. With the enter key, it's going to say, where do you want this to go to? Well, I want it to go to running config. So hit the enter key. And it's copying that onto my router. I see the name change to R3. Let's do a show run. There's my enable secret. There's my interface. Here's my other two interfaces. They're shut down. I'm going to need to turn them on. Here's my routing table. There is my SNMP config. There's my console. There's my SSH for my virtual terminals. So let's go turn those interfaces on. We have interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0/0. Let's do a no shutdown. Exit, and we have gigabit Ethernet 0/10. We need to do a no shutdown on. So those, I'll close my TFTP server out. Those interfaces should be coming online, which they are. Excellent. And I'm going to do another show run. And I'm looking to make sure things are online, which they are. So I'm going to do a copy run start on this guy. Copy the running config to startup, which is NVRAM. So I actually deleted the config on here, configured just enough to talk to the TFTP server, and copied the config that I saved here back to the router. So I can do just the opposite. I can save configs to the TFTP server, and I can also pull them back from the TFTP server, which again, I'm not manipulating text files or jump drives or USB drives or anything like that. All using my server as my central point of storage. So there is bringing that back. Copy run start. All right. Now, before I go any further, I want to see proof that you are using your TFTP server. So I'm going to go to TFTP here, and we're going to get a screenshot of this because I want to see your router configs on the TFTP server. So it's up to you. You can use the snipping tool, whatever tool you have there. On my app, I'm going to use Command-Shift-4. That gives me the little crosshairs that I can click and drag, and it's going to make me a screenshot of that. It's going to put it right on my desktop, and I will go and find that and rename it TFTP server just for ease of recognition when I submit to D2L. Alrighty, so there is working with my TFTP server. We'll come back in the next podcast and look at our SNMP protocol.